What if I told you that right now, at this very moment, family you've never heard of controls more power than any president or billionaire? What if the richest people in the world answer to them? What if wars start and stop because of their orders? What if they've been doing this for thousands of years, and nobody knows their names? Today, we are going to expose the truth that governments don't want you to see. We are going to reveal how one bloodline has secretly pulled the strings of human civilization. And I promise you, by the end of this video, you'll never look at world power the same way again. Here are 3 things that will shock you. First, how they control world leaders without anyone noticing. Second, the hidden technology they possess that keeps them invisible. Third, why they let some people become billionaires while keeping themselves completely hidden. Let me show you exactly how this happened and why it matters to you right now. Everything started in a small town in the American Midwest. A young man named Jacob worked as a history teacher. He loved reading old books and finding connections others missed. One day, while digging through a library basement, he found something strange. It was a leather journal from the 1800s. Inside were names, lists and lists of names. But these weren't normal people's names. These names appeared over and over again in history books. Kings, queens, presidents, business leaders, military generals. The same family surnames kept showing up across centuries and continents. Jacob became obsessed. He started researching. He found records showing these families connected through marriages, business deals, and secret meetings. He discovered that whenever major world events happened, members of this bloodline were always nearby. Wars started, kings died, empires fell, and somehow, this family always survived. They always got richer. They always got more powerful. The scariest part was what he found next. These people left clues, hidden messages in plain sight, symbols on buildings, codes in business documents. It was like they wanted someone to notice, but only if they looked hard enough, only if they were smart enough. Jacob realized something terrifying. They weren't hiding at all. They were hiding in plain sight. He connected with other researchers online. Historians, economists, former government workers. They all saw the same patterns. They all felt the same confusion. How could one family be everywhere? How could they control so much? How could nobody talk about it? Then Jacob found the documents. Real paperwork, meeting notes, financial records. They showed secret organizations, private clubs where world leaders met, bank accounts worth trillions of dollars, holdings in every major corporation, connections to every government. It painted a picture of something impossible. A shadow government, a hidden empire, a bloodline that actually ruled the world. But here's where it gets stranger. Jacob discovered they weren't hiding because they were afraid. They were hiding because they didn't need to be found. They controlled the information. They controlled the media. They controlled the schools. If people didn't know about them, they couldn't stop them. And if people did find out, who would believe them? One researcher found something incredible. In old royal records, there were hints of something beyond money and power. These families had advanced knowledge, technology, understanding of things science couldn't explain yet. Some documents mentioned ancient artifacts, hidden libraries, secret research facilities. It suggested these families weren't just rich and powerful. They were different. Maybe they had always been different. Jacob's hands shook as he read these words. The researcher wrote, "They move through history like we move through rooms. We see the doors and walls. They see the blueprint. They see how everything connects. They see where the pressure points are. They know which lever to push to change everything." That's when Jacob understood the full picture. This wasn't just about money. This wasn't just about power. This was about something deeper. Control. Complete, absolute control. Not over governments alone, but over the direction of human civilization itself. He decided to share everything. Every connection. Every document. Every pattern he found. He created encrypted files and sent them to trusted researchers worldwide. Some disappeared. Some were visited by people claiming to be from security agencies. Some stopped responding to emails. But the information was already spreading. People were noticing. People were asking questions. The Bloodline had kept their secret for thousands of years. But the internet was changing everything. Information couldn't be stopped anymore. Their greatest fear was becoming real. People were waking up. People were connecting the dots. And nothing would ever be the same. After Jacob released the information, something extraordinary happened. Thousands of people started investigating on their own. They checked property records. They traced bank transfers. They looked at board memberships. And they found the network. It was bigger than anyone imagined. These families owned land everywhere. Not just houses. Entire cities. Forests. Islands. Mountains. They owned companies. Technology firms. Banks. Media companies. Entertainment studios. Food production. Pharmaceutical companies. Energy companies. If you used it, wore it, ate it, or watched it, there was a good chance this Bloodline owned the company that made it. But the property and companies weren't even the scariest part. The scariest part was the organizations. Secret societies that had existed for hundreds of years. Clubs where world leaders met. Foundations that made charitable decisions affecting millions of lives. Think tanks where the future was literally planned. These organizations had names some people knew. Others were completely hidden. Researchers found meeting records. Minutes from gatherings in exclusive locations. Alpine lodges. Private islands. Underground facilities. The people at these meetings weren't celebrities or politicians most people recognized. They were the people behind the politicians. The advisors. The money providers. The ones who actually made decisions. One researcher named Sarah made a discovery that changed everything. She found patterns in when major world events happened. Recessions, wars, political uprisings, disease outbreaks, election results, major technological breakthroughs. She tracked them against the Bloodline's known activities. The correlation was undeniable. Before major events, members of this family moved money, changed positions, met with world leaders, made strategic announcements. It was like watching a chess game where one player could see all future moves. They positioned pieces long before the game actually played. By the time regular people noticed something happening, the outcome was already decided. The Bloodline knew the future because they literally created it. Sarah discovered something else terrifying. This family had records going back further than anyone expected. Not hundreds of years. Thousands of years. Ancient documents. Clay tablets. Stone carvings. They suggested these families weren't new. They weren't modern power brokers who got lucky. They were ancient. Their bloodline stretched back to civilizations that no longer existed. Some documents used unusual language. Words that sounded almost alien. Descriptions of knowledge that seemed impossible for ancient people to possess. Mentions of technology. Advanced understanding of astronomy. Mathematics. Medicine. Engineering. It raised a question that most people thought was insane. What if this bloodline wasn't entirely human? What if they came from somewhere else? Other researchers started investigating this angle seriously. They looked at ancient religions, myths, stories passed down through generations. In almost every culture, There were tales of sky gods or star visitors who came to Earth and taught humanity. They brought knowledge. They established families. They interbred with humans. They created a bloodline that was different, better, more intelligent, longer-lived. In Hindu texts, they were called devas. In biblical stories, they were called Nephilim. In ancient Egypt, they were called the Neteru. In Mesopotamia, the Anunnaki. Different names, same story. A bloodline that wasn't fully human. A bloodline that ruled. Scientists got involved. Geneticists examined historical records. They found unusual patterns in DNA from certain bloodlines. Markers that didn't match modern human evolution perfectly. Genetic material that suggested ancient mixing with something unknown. The findings were controversial. Most mainstream science rejected them immediately. But the data was real. This bloodline's secret wasn't just that they were powerful. It was that they were different. Fundamentally different. They had abilities, longer lifespans, better health, higher intelligence, and they'd been using these advantages to control humanity for millennia. Not out of evil, just out of necessity. They were shepherds, and humanity was their flock. That was simply how things worked in their world. The most shocking discovery came when researchers found the technology. Not ancient, primitive technology, advanced technology, technology that shouldn't exist, technology that surpassed modern human engineering in ways that seemed impossible. Deep in archived government files that someone leaked, there were patents, descriptions of devices, machines, systems, but the patents were filed under fake companies that no longer existed. The descriptions used strange terminology, words that mixed ancient languages with modern scientific concepts. They described energy systems, communication devices, medical machines, transportation methods, all of it centuries ahead of what the world officially knew how to build. One document mentioned something called harmonic resonance chambers. Another described dimensional phase stabilizers. Another talked about consciousness projection networks. These weren't Star Trek science fiction. These were engineering specifications. Detailed drawings, mathematical equations, building plans. Researchers found evidence that these devices existed. Not just in drawings, in real locations, deep underground facilities, hidden laboratories, some supposedly located beneath mountains, others beneath oceans, a few supposedly beneath major cities where nobody would think to look. One whistleblower came forward, a man named Thomas, who claimed to have worked in one of these facilities for 15 years. He said the technology was real. He described machines that could do impossible things, healing devices that cured diseases instantly, communication systems that worked across any distance without electronics, energy devices that created power from nothing, transportation that bent space and time. Thomas said the Bloodline guarded this technology jealously. They let humanity develop slowly, deliberately. They released certain technologies when the time was right. The internet, smartphones, electric cars, renewable energy. These weren't human inventions. They were controlled releases of knowledge the Bloodline already possessed. He explained that the Bloodline used these devices to maintain control. They could monitor people without cameras, listen to conversations without devices, track locations without GPS. They could influence thoughts subtly, control moods, affect health, all through technology most people didn't know existed. The scariest part was Thomas's description of their newest project, something called the network, a global system that would connect every human mind. Not physically, digitally, through consciousness itself. It would let the Bloodline know what everyone thought, what they wanted, what they feared. Complete transparency. Complete control. Thomas said this project was almost complete. The infrastructure was being built right now. 5G networks, satellite internet systems, quantum computers, DNA databases, all pieces of something bigger, something designed to create a connected consciousness. One global mind, with the bloodline at the top. When Thomas finished his testimony, he disappeared. 3 weeks later, his body was found. The official cause was a heart attack. But his friends knew the truth. The bloodline had silenced him. They eliminated threats. They always did. But Thomas had already shared too much. Other researchers continued where he left off. They found more evidence, more facilities, more documents. They discovered that some of the world's smartest people knew about this. Some were working on it voluntarily. They believed it was for humanity's greater good. A way to solve world problems, eliminate suffering, create peace. Others were forced to work on it. Scientists, engineers, programmers, people with skills the bloodline needed. They worked in secret, in isolated locations, sometimes for years. When they were done, some were allowed to go home. Others weren't. The bloodline couldn't risk secrets leaking. But you couldn't stop information forever. Not in the modern world. Documents leaked. Former workers talked. Researchers pieced together the truth. The bloodline had advanced technology. They'd always had it. They used it to maintain power. And they were building something that would make them impossible to overthrow. The final piece came from an unexpected source. A former bloodline member. Someone born into the family who rejected it. She released documents proving everything. The technology was real. The facilities were real. The network project was real. And it was almost ready. She warned humanity. She said people had maybe 5 years to understand what was happening. 5 years to prepare. 5 years to decide if they would accept this new world or fight for something different. When the bloodline member released those documents, the world changed. Governments went into overdrive. Some tried to suppress the information. Others tried to understand it. Scientists demanded access to the facilities. The United Nations called emergency meetings. Protests erupted in cities worldwide. The bloodline's response was unexpected. They didn't deny anything. They released a statement. Public, professional, almost like they'd been waiting for this moment. They said they'd been protecting humanity, guiding it, preventing wars before they started, stopping diseases, directing technological progress, all for humanity's benefit. They claimed the network wasn't about control. It was about evolution, the next step in human consciousness, a way for humanity to solve its greatest problems. They said they welcomed the world's scrutiny. They invited scientists to visit the facilities. They offered to share the technology, but they asked for something in return: trust and cooperation. They couldn't share everything immediately. Some technology was too dangerous. Some knowledge was too advanced. Humanity needed to grow into it. They would be the guides. Many people believed them. They seemed reasonable, transparent, genuinely interested in helping. Maybe they were good guys. Maybe they'd been good guys all along. Maybe humanity had just misunderstood them. But not everyone was convinced. Activists demanded full disclosure. They wanted all technology, all knowledge, no more secrets. They wanted the bloodline investigated. They wanted their wealth redistributed. They wanted real democracy, real freedom, not guided evolution, not a shepherd and a flock. The bloodline didn't fight back violently. They didn't need to. They had power everywhere. Governments suddenly moved slowly on investigations. Media outlets stopped talking about it. Activists found themselves investigated for unrelated crimes. Bank accounts frozen. Homes audited. The pressure was subtle but effective. But something else happened too. People woke up. Millions of people. They saw the truth. Not everyone believed the Bloodline story. Not everyone trusted them. Grassroots movements started. Underground networks. People sharing information without using official channels. They prepared. They researched. They planned. Universities created new programs to understand the leaked technology. Countries began developing their own advanced systems. Some tried to build network-blocking technology. Others worked on counter-technologies. Nations that hadn't trusted the Bloodline started forming alliances. They wanted to create alternatives. Real choices. Real power outside the Bloodline's control. The Bloodline watched this with interest. It was like they expected it. Like they'd seen this before. In other civilizations. In other times. Humanity always resisted at first. Always tried to break free. But eventually, they always accepted. They always saw the Bloodline's way as inevitable. But this time felt different. This time, humanity had something previous civilizations didn't have. The internet, instant global communication, shared knowledge, videos, documents, proof. It was harder to control a population that could verify information themselves. Jacob, the teacher who started everything, watched from his small town. He'd become famous. Some called him a hero. Others called him traitor to humanity. He just wanted to know the truth. He wanted the world to make informed decisions. He received an invitation. It came by special courier. Sealed. Official. The Bloodline wanted to meet with him. Not to threaten him. To talk. To explain their perspective. To see if they could reach understanding. Jacob sat in his study for hours. Should he go? Should he trust them? Should he hear what they had to say? He decided yes. If humanity was going to move forward, it needed dialogue. Not conflict. Not blind trust. Just honest conversation. He packed a bag. He told no one where he was going. And he prepared to meet the Bloodline face to face. Jacob arrived at a location so beautiful it seemed impossible it existed. A private estate nestled in mountains, so remote that civilization felt like a distant memory. Advanced architecture mixed with natural design. Technology and nature in perfect harmony. It was what a paradise might look like if advanced beings created it. He was greeted by a woman. She introduced herself simply as Arya. She had unusual features. Eyes that seemed to hold depths of time. Skin that glowed subtly. A presence that made him feel both welcome and terrified simultaneously. Arya showed him the facility. Not a threatening bunker. A research center. Gardens. Libraries. Laboratories. Universities. Thousands of people worked here. Humans and others who looked almost human but not quite. They lived together. Studied together. Worked on solving problems. Disease. Hunger. Environmental collapse. War. All of it. She explained that the Bloodline's true name translated roughly as the Keepers. For over 12,000 years, they'd watched humanity. When humans discovered fire, the Keepers let them. When humans invented agriculture, the Keepers guided it. When humans discovered electricity, it was no accident. The Keepers had been leaving breadcrumbs of knowledge, letting humanity discover things at a pace they could handle. Arya said the Bloodline wasn't evil. They weren't trying to control humanity for selfish reasons. They genuinely cared. But they also understood something humans didn't. Unlimited freedom led to chaos. Unlimited power led to self-destruction. Humans needed guidance. Just like parents guide children. Not out of malice, Out of love. She showed Jacob the network facilities, explained it wasn't mind control. It was consciousness linking. Voluntary. People could feel each other's emotions, understand each other deeply. Conflicts would become impossible because you'd feel the other person's pains. Suffering would motivate solving problems. It would create the first truly united human society. Jacob asked the hard questions. What about free will? What about people who didn't want to join? What about power? Who decided what the network would do? Arya answered honestly. Free will would still exist. The network would be optional, at least initially. People who refused could continue living as they always had. But eventually, most would join because the benefits were undeniable. As for power, the keepers would be guardians, not dictators. They would set boundaries, prevent the network from being misused. But decisions would belong to humanity. Jacob realized she was telling the truth as she understood it. She genuinely believed this was good. She wasn't lying. She was just explaining perspective he'd never considered. He asked to meet with the others, the council of the Bloodline, the oldest members, the ones who actually made decisions. What happened next changed everything. They were ancient, not physically old, ancient in their eyes. They'd lived for centuries, thousands of years. They showed him their history, not words, memories, direct consciousness sharing. Jacob experienced it. He felt what it was like to live 500 years, to watch civilizations rise and fall, to make decisions affecting millions of people, to carry the weight of that responsibility. He understood then. They weren't monsters. They were tired, exhausted. They'd been carrying humanity's future alone for so long. The network wasn't about control. It was about finally sharing the burden, finally letting humanity grow up, finally passing responsibility to people who could actually handle it. The keepers made him an offer. Join them. Help explain to humanity what was really happening. Help humanity choose consciously. Because that's what this was really about. A choice. Not a takeover. A genuine choice. Jacob returned to his town 3 weeks later. Changed. He released a new statement. Complicated. Not the condemnation people expected. But not endorsement either. It was honest. Raw. He explained what he'd learned, what he'd experienced. He asked humanity to look honestly at the keepers. Not with fear, not with blind acceptance, with open eyes. He said the real future wasn't about what the keepers did to humanity. It was about what humanity chose to do with the knowledge they now possessed. They could fight. They could resist. They could negotiate. They could accept. They could create something entirely new. The Bloodline's greatest power, Jacob realized, wasn't their technology or their wealth. It was their patience. They could wait. They always won because they thought in terms of centuries. Humanity had suddenly awakened to this game that had been running for millennia. The question wasn't whether the keepers would winches. The question was whether humanity would finally grow up and participate as equals. The choice was real. The future was unwritten. And for the first time in 12,000 years, humanity would have a voice in deciding what happened next. But here's the twist nobody expected. As humanity grappled with this revelation, scientists made another discovery. The Bloodline's ancient records contain something else. Maps, star maps, coordinates to other planets, evidence that suggested the keepers weren't originally from Earth at all. They came here thousands of years ago, from somewhere beyond our solar system. They seeded humanity with their DNA. They've been returning ever since, guiding, waiting, and finally, the time had come for humanity to learn the truth. They weren't just a powerful family. They were ambassadors. Earth was being invited to join something larger. A galactic community. A civilization spanning multiple worlds. Humanity's awakening was part of a bigger process. A test. Would they choose wisdom? Would they choose growth? Would they finally be ready to take their place among the stars? That's when Jacob understood everything. The hidden bloodline pulling strings wasn't about control. It was about preparation. Earth wasn't being ruled. It was being prepared for something magnificent, something terrifying, something that would change everything. And the choice was real. Humanity's choice. Their moment. Their destiny. So here's what you need to understand. This story shows us three critical truths. First, power works in ways most people never see. Hidden systems, subtle influence, long-term planning. What you see in headlines is rarely the whole picture. Second, advanced knowledge exists beyond what mainstream institutions teach. Not as conspiracy, as possibility, as something worth investigating honestly. Third, and most importantly, the future isn't written. It's something humanity chooses. Together, with open eyes, with full information. If this opened your eyes to new ways of thinking about power, history, and the future, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. We release deep dive content every week exploring hidden histories and alternative possibilities. But here's something more important. Join our community. Comment below with your thoughts. Do you believe hidden forces shape history? How would humanity change if we knew the real truth? Your perspective matters. This conversation belongs to everyone. If you want deeper analysis of these topics, check out our newsletter. We share exclusive research, leaked documents analysis, and early access to upcoming investigations. Link in the description. Finally, watch our next video. We're investigating what really happened to the scientists who discovered this technology. Some disappeared. Some lived impossible lives. And their stories are even stranger than what you just heard. The truth is out there, and you're ready to find it.